Hi, I'm Michelle Muscat, and I'm conducting an interview of Allie Aller for QSOS. Today is May 10th, 2021. Allie, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Allie. I'm here in my sewing room. I'm located in Washougal, Washington, which is just north and a little bit east of Portland, Oregon.
Great. Well, it's so wonderful to be here with you today. Can you tell us about the quilt that is hanging behind you? We ask quilters that we interview to bring a touchstone quilt. Could you tell us a little bit about it?
I can tell you a little bit about this is called Mandala in the Woods. I've been making mandalas out of fresh flowers for years and years. And finally, I thought I would use some of these wonderful fabric flowers to create a lasting mandala. The other thing about this quilt to me is that it brings together three different genres that I've spent a lot of time working in. It's got stained glass work, it's
Mhm.
got traditional quilt layout, and it's also got a lot of crazy quilting in it. So it was an experiment where I wanted to combine all of my passions in one quilt.
So, do you think that the special meaning of this quilt for you is really bringing the culmination of all those different genres together?
Yes, yes, it is. And the fact that as always, I'm an experimenter and I'm
Mhm.
always trying like hybridizing genres or new techniques, combining techniques. So I'm always challenging myself. And this quilt was a challenge. And I met some of them and I failed in some of them too. Uh, and it also marked kind of the end of an era for me. I had worked so hard in all these different genres, and this was sort of a culmination quilt in all of those. So, yes, it's very special.
Usually we ask, why did you bring this particular quilt to the interview? But it seems like you summed that up. Um,
Okay.
a vast amount of time that you have done all of these different type of genres in your work.
Mhm.
And it seems it's like pretty exciting to see that.
Well, as I say, what was the two big experiments for me in this one is the leaves around the perimeter are actually raw edge applique, but I used my stained glass technique and I did it in red, which I had never done before because I wanted those leaves to pop off the green background. So red is the opposite of green. So I really liked how that worked. Another thing that I'd always wanted to do was combine a free motion machine quilting with crazy quilting because it's like, how do you combine these two surfaces? One is very 3D and one is not. And do they go together? Can you actually do it? And I did some of it and then I didn't really want to pursue it farther. So, I mean, to me, it's important to keep pushing, keep experimenting. And so I did. And I don't know if I would do that one again, actually.
It was one of those once in a lifetime quilts, do you think?
Uh, oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I never, ever do the same thing twice if I can help it.
Well, knowing you, I think that it's really speaks to your nature, your love of nature, and your creative, adventurous spirit too.
Oh,
So,
thank you. Thank
tell
you.
me a little bit about your interest in quilt making. How did you get started? What interests
Uh,
you?
you know, I I didn't grow up with quilters. My mother was the opposite of a domestic goddess. She was an early working woman. She was a career woman. I didn't grow up around it. And I don't even know how it first came to me, except that from the very beginning, quilts represent the touchstones in people's lives. They are like when someone gets married or someone gets born or someone graduates. I mean, they're always a marker of something important. And my oldest brother was getting married. So I thought I've got to make him a quilt. So my junior year of high school, I bought something like 20 red bandanas and 20 blue bandanas and two army surplus blankets and used an old sheet. And I somehow put this thing together and it weighed about 50 pounds.
That
So that, I think the initial impulse was to make something meaningful to give to someone. That's how it started.
And you said you were a junior in high school.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
were there other people around you that were making quilts or sewing? How did you actually learn to put this together?
I had taken home ec in eighth
Okay.
grade and made a pillowcase and a skirt that didn't fit and sewed through my finger. I remember that. But I mean, I had been introduced to the sewing machine in school. And then down the line, I have this cousin, my cousin Tracy Seidman, who has always been a big mentor to me artistically. She is to this day, 50 years later. But at the time, the late 60s, she was a freelance illustrator and her medium was applique. She was way ahead of her time, way ahead of her time. But I was fascinated by what she was doing. And she's really the one who got me started. She knew I had an interest. She I mean, you couldn't just go to a quilt store and buy fabrics. You had to go to a sewing store and see if you could find anything that might work. And so she had a small stash. And when she realized how interested I was, she opened the cupboard to her stash and said, "Take what you want." Now, that was a turning point in my life that she did something like that. And that was the beginning. That was really the beginning.
But she wasn't a quilter herself, though. She was
Well, no, she made applique illustrations, and then one of her first big jobs was she did the cover of the corporate report for GE.
oh, mhm.
100-year anniversary corporate report. They commissioned an applique album quilt from her. So, which she gave to me. I have it now. It's very special.
But it's interesting how you knew that you needed a top, a filler, and a backing.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's got to be ingrained in
Okay.
our culture, you
I
know.
think you're right because I think I had the similar experience from
Yeah.
my first one. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so what is your actual first quilt memory? Maybe not of you making a quilt, but do you have a quilt memory of
You
being
know,
under a quilt or seeing
I
a quilt?
all I can think of, because really they were not in my life in any way, is there was a kid's book that had an illustration of a quilt in it. And I remember being just utterly fascinated.
Oh, that's interesting.
But I didn't live with them. I really not until Tracy kind of turned me loose. And then, when I was in college, my mother was sick. And the way I dealt with that was to quilt, to make a quilt while she was basically dying in the hospital. I had this quilt with me all the time. And
When you were
that
sitting with her as well?
yeah, or I would spread my blocks out on the floor of the corridor outside her hospital room. I took the blocks with me to like social events. We were
Mhm.
staying at my aunt and uncle's. It's like I could not let go of them. It was it was really intense, but it was a total immersion from the beginning.
Well, it helped you get through that time.
It did.
Yeah.
It so did. Yeah.
So besides Tracy, were there other family members or friends that among, your friends that were quilt makers back then that maybe also, piqued your interest?
There was one when I was in college. I was in a great department. It was the design and apparel department at Cornell, and there were a lot of sewers and weavers and designers, and that kind of opened up the textile world to me. But there was one gal who had this beautiful applique quilt that she had made, and I remember thinking, what is that? What is that? But we didn't sew together or anything like that.
No. Well,
Mm-mm.
so were you an art major at Cornell?
I was a design major,
Okay.
which God, I'm so grateful. I mean, those those early design studios, those 6 credit studios that were so tough that I never got good grades, but I really worked hard and I learned so much, and I use that like every day. I'm so grateful for it.
Oh, that's amazing that you just brought that along. What a great start for you in
Oh,
your design
it
experience.
was so helpful. So helpful. Yeah.
What do you think brings you the most joy when you're quilt making? What part of quilt making is the most joyful for you or brings you?
Well, I think every quilter will tell you, I love to put fabrics together. I'm pretty
Mhm.
sure everybody feels that way. And when I'm starting a new quilt and pulling fabrics, I mean, I call it the old black magic. That old black magic starts starts to bubble. I love putting fabrics together. I absolutely adore that. But not just cotton fabrics. I mean, because of my years in crazy quilting, you can see in
Right.
this quilt.
Mhm.
I mean, most of the green border is hand dyed wool combined with hand dyed silk, and then I've got velvet in there. I've got all these different weaves and fibers and surfaces, and I love putting those together in interesting ways. I just love that. So I would have to say that's number one.
Do you think that's part of what you love about, like, you bring your gardening and your love of nature into your work because of that,
Um,
the different maybe textures and layers that you find there?
Textures, layers, the way the light moves through a garden. Yeah, sure. And just basic design principles is you've got to have contrast,
Yes.
between shiny and dull, between rough and smooth, between matte and all those different opposites. If you can put them up against each other and make them enhance each other, it's a blast. It's a blast.
It makes it very rich too, you know.
Ah,
So what aspects of quilt making, like, do you least enjoy doing? Is
ah.
there something that you aren't
Yeah,
really
and
fond
again, I
of?
think this quilt illustrates it. I have a hard time keeping my borders straight and my corners perpendicular. I mean, the precision technical end of it is what is hardest for me. And I mean, you can see, I really tried to pin it up straight, but
Uh-huh.
you know, but because I'm trying all these kind of experiments, it might be harder to get it as perfect as I want, but I'm working on it. I'm working on it. And just as an aside, when you enter a quilt show, people go, "Oh, I don't want to be judged, blah 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 blah." And I understand that, but I enter a quilt in a show in order to up my craftsmanship.
Okay.
That's a big motivator for me. If I'm going to go into a show, I am going to make it as absolutely perfect as I can, and it's really good discipline because it's hard for me.
It's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah,
There's been a lot of advances in technology in quilting. Have any of those influenced your work?
absolutely. And I would say the internet, that
Mhm.
technology, because I get exposed to so many people's work that I wouldn't get to see otherwise. And I am so turned on by what I see other people doing. And without the internet, I would not have that. I live out in the country and I kind of sew
Right.
in a vacuum. I'm not involved in guilds or anything like that. I'm a homebody. And so I would say that was number one.
Mhm.
Number two, obviously the rotary cutter and mat to speed up cutting. Um, uh, that's of course it. I think fusible web has really changed my work. Um,
Has there
because
been any, like, computerized technology at all that you find that has influenced you as well?
absolutely not. Oh, I should backtrack. I have printed photos onto fabric and then incorporated that in my quilt. So I can go that far. I'm always looking for a better print though. I'm
Right.
always looking for a better print.
Well, you do seem to, move on and challenge yourself with new techniques continually. I've known you for a long time and watched your work. So are there, as you're trying all these new materials and techniques, are there some in particular that you find that are your favorites?
Well, they do grow on me. They do grow on me as I get a little more proficient in them.
Mhm.
Like one of the challenges I set myself a couple of years ago was to really pay attention to free motion quilting. I'd always said, I'm a crazy quilter. I don't need that. Or, everybody's doing it. I'm not going to follow the crowd. But then there came a time when I realized I really need this tool in my toolbox.
Uh-huh.
So I went after it, and I'm really nowhere where I want to be, but I'm enjoying it more. I mean, I don't think I've even cracked the code on how to design quilting motifs as an element into a quilt. I'm a complete newbie at that, but you know,
And are you using a computerized machine?
no, I have got a handy quilter Capri 18. It's a fixed needle, but it's got a
Mhm.
huge bed, and I even have it set so that I quilt standing up, which is better
Oh,
for my
okay.
posture.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's a wonderful machine, but it's not computer guided or programmable or anything like that.
It's all you.
For better or for worse, yeah. There's another, I mean, another area I'm just embarking on now, which is it's using the quilt medium as illustration. I'm coming all the way back to where my cousin was, although she did everything in fabric, and I find that I'm doing a lot of pencil work and onto fabric, and then collaging that kind of in a textile collage, which is very new for me. And agony getting started, just agony. It was so hard, but I wouldn't give up. I wouldn't give
Good.
up. So,
And we'll talk a little bit more about the technique in a little bit too.
okay.
So, would you describe the place that you work and create your studio? It doesn't just have to be one fixed place. You might have a few at home.
Okay. Well, I don't know how I got so lucky, but I have the best room in our house for my sewing room. We have kind of a daylight basement built in the 70s on top of a hill, and it looks out, beautiful view. And my room is the corner, so I have windows on two sides facing a little bit, well, Mount Hood's that way, so kind of south and east. So I have great lighting. I have a great view. It's my room. For Christmas one year, I got a door so I could close the door to my sewing room. And I'm here all the time. I think of it as my playroom, my workroom, my refuge. Um, so I spend my time here, but if it's really, really nice out and I've got handwork, there's a table out in front, which you've sat at with me,
Yes, it's
where
really lovely.
I sew outside. I'll even bring my sewing machine out there with a long
Oh,
extension cord if it's a nice day.
yeah.
Yeah. So those two places, I think.
All right. Allie, what do you think makes a great quilt?
I think I think that when you look at a quilt and you can sense the absolute commitment of the quilt maker and the passion of the quilt maker and the fact that the quilt maker will not compromise on their vision, even if it takes, forever to do one little corner of it. To me, it's all about the approach of the quilt maker, and then the quilt will follow, the great quilt will follow. But I think I think it's the passion that you bring to it that makes it great.
Really love that answer. It really makes people realize how personal quilt making can really be.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
So that kind of also answers what makes a great quilt maker or what makes a great quilt. So you kind of, I guess those are
They're
symbiotic.
linked. If I'm walking through a show, um, and I see a quilt that is nothing even remotely close to what I would make myself,
Mhm.
but if I see that the person had an impulse or a vision and just did not stop until they did everything they could to realize that vision, that's going to be a great quilt. That's going to be, and sometimes, the technical end of things will compromise that, and that's really too bad. You have to keep your craftsmanship game as high as you can so as not to interfere with what you're trying to, present. Learn that the hard way many times.
I guess it really also means like where the quilt is going to end up, if that
Mm,
matters as much, maybe.
mm,
I mean,
mm. You know,
you.
that's a really valid point. I'm going to be making a quilt for my sister's birthday in over the next week, and I know I'm not going to have to worry about the technical ends of it
Right.
as much. I mean, I've got enough experience and skills that I can, feel okay about what's going to come out, but I'm certainly not going to be anal and worried about it at all, which is nice.
Right. Yeah. So you're going to be making this quilt for your sister. Do you often, if you're making a quilt, whether you're going is for a specific reason or not, do you kind of bring to mind a particular muse you have to kind of push you through it?
Oh, well, in this case, has she's got she's redone the sitting area off her kitchen very recently. She's got new couches and a new rug. And without going into it, it's a new era for her.
Right.
She lost her son about a month ago, and she wanted to have a fresh start, fresh slate for where the family all gathers. And I look at the rug and I look at the couch, and it's like you need a quilt for here. I mean, and so I use the colors of her rug and her couch, and I'm basing my quilt around that. So it's basically a functional quilt designed for that space. And I love to do that. I absolutely love to do that.
And it's for a very special person in your life as well. So
Oh yes. Oh yes.
every stitch will contain your love.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you have some artists or quilt artists that have influenced you throughout your career?
Um, those are actually two different kind of questions.
Yep.
The I would say my main influence, my main artistic influence was Louis Comfort Tiffany.
Mhm.
Not just because I like stained glass quilts, but his use of color just completely, completely rocked my world. I mean, nobody does it better, in my opinion, than Tiffany, his use of color. So he was one. And then the other artist who I've been aware of for a long time, she's online now. You can find her. Her name is Amanda Richardson.
Mhm.
She is a British textile collage artist, and she dyes all her own fabrics, and she does gardens or seascapes, and very, very literal and realistic, and she is a master. And I have always admired her, always. um, I wrote to her and I said, do you have any scraps? She said, no, I give them all to a hat maker.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like a felter.
Oh,
So,
okay. Yeah.
but in terms of quilt makers, I would say there's three.
Mhm.
The first one, she's off the radar. She's a crazy quilter, unbound. Her name is Martha Green. And when I first saw what Martha did with crazy quilting, she was so free and unbound, and her colors were so not Victorian. I mean, she just opened some big doors for me. So Martha was one. Another one is Terry Mangett. I She's got a new last name, I think. I don't remember, but she was a very early on art quilter. And she again was very, very unbound and free. She was one of the first ones to start sewing things onto quilts in the
Mhm.
70s. And I will say, as an aside, I was reading Terry's QSOS interview, and lo and behold, who was one of her early influences? Martha Green.
Really?
They
Wow.
both lived in Oklahoma City in the
Uh-huh.
70s. And she said, yeah, Martha. And I asked Martha about it, and she said, oh yeah, me and Terry go way back. So Martha and Terry, and then on the more traditional end, there's a lady working now named Cynthia Collier. She had the Broderie Purse exhibited in Houston in 19. Cynthia does just exquisite work, just exquisite work. She's a great teacher. She's a great quilter, and in my viewing, she can do no wrong. and I take great inspiration from her.
And
My
what's
three.
her particular genre like? I mean,
Broderie purse, traditional,
okay,
gorgeous,
okay,
absolutely gorgeous. Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah.
Oh, why is quilt making really important in your own life?
Well, why is breathing important? you know, I think it serves two functions. One, um, again, the meaningful way to express your love to someone. I
Mhm.
don't think there's any more meaningful present than a quilt. No matter what the occasion, I love to be able to give quilts as gifts. And my whole family, their beds are 3 quilts high and their walls are all padded. I mean, they've all got them. I love that. And then the other part of it, of course, is, the artistic quest, you know, just I've never thought of quilting as an art form. I just don't see it as a form of self expression. I think I'm really more a designer at heart,
Mhm.
and I look at it more as problem solving. How can I do this so that it, you know, fulfills what I want it to do, or it functions as I want it to function? But I would say I just have to keep at it. I just have to. There's no choice in the matter.
Well, I think there's a lot of artists that feel like the process is more satisfying than the end result. Or do you feel like that's kind of
Oh,
who you are?
for sure, for sure. I mean, a real basic question is, how is this going to look? I have to know that. But aside from that, it's like, how do I get to feel while I'm working? What state of mind will I be in while I'm working? And I think not just quilters, knitters, people who work with fiber in their hands will say it is so calming and it is such a relief to calm my mind while I'm working and escape all the noise in my head. It's that state of mind that I love and that I shoot for. And my quilt's kind of a nice byproduct.
Yes. I think that's probably why so many of us um, that make quilts have that connection because
Mm.
we feel that way that you just explained to us because that's how
Oh,
I feel. And I think that's, do you think that's maybe why it brings us together so easily?
oops, oops. Well, I think we're kindred spirits for sure, for
Mhm.
sure. I remember once reading that there was some little health place in Tennessee or someplace, Kentucky maybe, where heart patients, type A businessmen who've had heart attacks, they go to recover and they teach them to knit as
Oh,
part of their
yeah.
recovery. And I so get that. I so get that.
And what do you think the importance of quilts are in American life today?
Um, well, let's see. I mean, it, Joe Cunningham, he's a great quilter. And he said something once that, of course, I never forgot. He said, quilting is in America's DNA. And I really think so. I think it's part of our culture. It's it symbolizes so many things, and it fulfills so many gosh, I'm not saying this well, but it fulfills so many areas of meaning in American life. I can't imagine America without quilting. I can't imagine. I'm not really answering this very well, but it's such a part of our national
Well,
psyche.
yeah, you feel like it's just intertwined. It's like with the fiber of our life. It's kind
It
of,
it
like the fiber of a
it
quilt,
it, it
you
is,
know?
and you so many people do it. It brings us together because we all, I mean, not all, but there are millions and millions and millions of us here in America who are doing this. It's um
It's,
it's
it's
a
all-
it's a common frame of reference that we have. That's a really positive one.
just interestingly enough, during this time of being kind of home during the pandemic, we probably all have noticed quilts on people's walls, on the even the news. So that
Oh,
has been very interesting to see,
yeah.
you know.
And now in fashion, I guess it's really at the moment, you see
Yes.
people in garments made of old quilts. I mean, they symbolize security and peace and comfort and love and all these great things that we all need, you know.
And that
Yeah.
does come around every so often,
Yeah.
back into fashion and so forth.
Yeah. It's
Um,
funny.
recently, you went on a journey in your own work, of a kind of a new, very a journey, a very personal journey, but you shared that with the quilting community on social media.
Yeah.
I always feel like you're a very generous artist, sharing your work, your technique, and also your deep emotions about your journey. So do you want to talk a little bit about your new quilting genre,
I
your
I will.
portraiture?
I will. This is a project. It's an illustration project that has turned into something way more meaningful. I had wanted my sister, who's a preschool teacher, and I wrote this cute little book called "In the Sky Went By," 3 or 4 years ago, and it took a while to figure out what I wanted each picture for my book to look like. And then I had to find a couple models because I couldn't draw them from the air. I had to use a photograph. And then I ended up asking my nephew, my late nephew Andy's wife, and his then 2 3-year-old daughter Lily to be my models. So I did this photo shoot in January of Lily and Kaylee, the mom, in all these different poses that I knew exactly how they were going to go in my I call them page spreads. And then, as it turns out, Andy was diagnosed with brain cancer, right? Like a week after we had our photo shoot. And this turned into, I would do these pictures of Kaylee and Lily and I would send them to Andy, and he's in bed on his phone, and it's making him happy, it's making him happy. So in part it was my way of staying connected to that family while they went through that really tough time. And now it's in Andy's memory, and it's going to be for Lily and Kaylee and the rest of the family. The one I'm working on right now is Kaylee and Lily are looking up at the sky, and there's a plane pulling a banner. And I had said, Andy, what do you want that to say? And he
Oh,
said, Dada loves you.
oh my gosh.
So
Yeah. So,
and the look on Kaylee and Lily's face, they're so happy pointing at it,
and
So,
it was very technically challenging though
oh,
for you as well.
oh,
I know. Do you think that was almost kind of just not distracted you, but helped you kind of get through it because you really had to concentrate on that?
absolutely. That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, everybody knows faces are hard.
Yes.
We are acutely tuned into the minutest change in expression. We're wired that way. So when you've got a piece of fabric that's this big and you've got to convey a face and an emotion, it's like, ay, ay, ay. There were some where I would trace off the photograph, and then I would try drawing my tracing freehand. I mean, there's some I did 200 times to
Wow.
to get the
Amazing.
dang.
Yeah.
Oh, and the rejects were really really bad. But I mean, I it was torture, but I was not going to give up. I mean, this was for Andy,
Right.
you know. This was for Andy. So, it's been great. I mean, I'm already thinking about the next one starring Grace, right? Got to be
And
fair.
how did you just so you just decided that that was the technique you were going to use to create a memory for him and the
Actually,
children?
actually, it took me a while to get to this technique. I started working with portraits, doing faces in different techniques. All last fall, I went through several months of trial and error of what was going to work. And then had a lot of failures, no traction. It was like, man, why don't I just go make another quilt? No. So finally, I found a combination of techniques that worked. And then away I went.
Yeah,
Away I
they're
went.
really beautiful, Allie. They're really
Thank you.
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story with all of us.
Oh, it is truly a labor of love, and it's exciting. I mean, when something works, it's like, yay.
Yeah. Do you know what has happened to all those quilts that you've given to family and friends? Do you keep track of who you give things to, or you just kind of, do most
Kind
people appreciate them?
Oh, yeah, they do.
Yeah.
I kind of keep track, but I mean, gosh, 50 years of quilt making, there's a lot of quilts, a lot of quilts. I could tell you the story of one. We talked about it before. This was again for Andy, my nephew Andy. He was 14 when he basically his bone marrow quit. They never really figured out why, but he was a candidate for a bone marrow transplant. So before he went into the hospital for that, Andy and I made a quilt together for him to have on his bed in the hospital. And Andy was like very artistic, full of energy, a lot of fun. We had a great time making his tiger quilt. So he gets through this bone marrow transplant, decides he wants to be a firefighter, and so he goes through firefighter school, and all the time he was going through school, he had that tiger quilt on his bed. And then he met the love of his life, Kaylee, and courted her and married her, and that tiger quilt's been on their bed.
Oh,
And and then and then he got sick, and all the times he went in the hospital, that tiger quilt was on his bed. And then when he was at home and in hospice, that tiger quilt was on his hospital bed, and he died under that quilt and willed it to my sister. Now, to me, that is what quilting is about, more than anything.
yes. Yes.
More than anything.
Whew.
I know. I know. I know.
We did
He'd say, "Hey, Dolly, good job there." I didn't start crying.
well, maybe because we talked about it the other day too, so that helped a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think is the biggest challenge confronting quilt makers today?
Um, this might sound weird, but too much choice. I think sometimes people can be
Oh,
overwhelmed by how many techniques, how many kinds of fabric, what do I do, And then some people can fall into the trap of buying and buying and buying for their quilts and not quilting. They're too busy collecting and having fun shopping. I shouldn't say this. I mean, it may be NPC, but you got to just stop all that, pick a few things and get to work.
and
I
do it.
guess,
Just do it. Yeah.
yeah, just do it. Just do it. I mean, that's kind of a weird answer, but that's what comes to my
No,
head.
it's your answer, and that's what's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
And it's such a joy to interview you because we're friends and we've been friends for a long time through quilts brought us together.
Yeah.
So I'm so honored to be able to be your interviewer today. Is there anything else you want to share with us before we leave?
Um, yeah, there's one thing, and that is you never know who you're going to impact with your quilting. You never know what little fire you're going to light. You just don't know. So I think it's a really good idea to have ready to go a basket or a bin that has basic quilting tools, a nice collection of fabric, maybe a book or a pattern, so that when someone's fire gets lit and you want to feed that flame, you're ready to just lay it on them and help them get started. I think that's something that we older quilters can do for the younger ones. Just have it ready and just like get that fire going.
Well, I'm not surprised you said that because it's really part of your very generous nature. So, in sharing. So, just want to thank you, Allie,
Thanks, Michelle.
for granting the interview today for QSOS. It's just been such a pleasure.
Oh, thanks. Thanks.
Okay.